Oh, welcome, y'all. It's been a minute since I've been doing this podcast, and so I'm so excited to be back. And I hope y'all have been enjoying this series of bringing folks back onto the podcast. I would highly encourage you to go listen to their old episode and listen to their new ones. But today I have the amazing Dr. Joan Collier with us, and I have so many questions. But first, I'm gonna let you introduce yourself to the people.
Oh man. Hey y'all. I'm Dr. Joan Collier. She, her pronouns. You could probably throw a they in there. Just know he, y'all. Keep it cute or keep it mute. About me, let me see. Went to the University of Georgia with Dr. Lacy. So I have my PhD in College Student Affairs Administration. In my professional capacity now, I serve as Assistant Vice President for Equity and Inclusion at Rutgers University, and have an affiliate faculty position in the Graduate School of Education. Shout out to the GSC at Rutgers, New Brunswick. And then in general, I'm a girl raised in the South. We're grits. That's what we call ourselves. I'm an extrovert. I'm a mix of crime mobs, nuck if you buck, and bell hooks, all about love. I love a good thrift. I'm a lottie dottie who likes to party. That's me.
I
Back to
love it.
the room, Dr. Lacy.
I was thinking about the other day because for me the purpose of this series is to like where are they now and what is life like on the other side of the
Yes.
dissertation, because you spend so many, I feel like a lot of people spend so many years and hours like, man, when I like be doctor and I have my
Yeah.
grown-up job, this is how it's gonna be. And we need to know what the reality of the situation looks like.
That's right.
But I was thinking about because I was just coaching in the institute about this. 2 months. We had 2 months to collect data, well, IRB data
Foolish.
analysis, and writing that up in the middle of grief.
Foolish.
And I know we talked a lot about this on the last episode. I just want to revisit
Yeah.
because this is a different perspective. What is it, 6, 7 years later?
7 years out now, Lacy, almost. Six.
How? Yeah, I don't know math. So,
6. Mhm.
how? how?
I
How?
think that was a bad,
Yeah.
every time I think about it, I mean, what I appreciate about being in conversation with you is we just get to be honest, right? And
Mhm.
you know this personally because we have talked about it. I actually have a little bit of shame around that because there's so many people who are like, I can't believe that's actually what you did. Y'all can't see my face, but I'm scrunching up my face really dramatically because there are people who are like, I just don't know how they did that. I don't believe it. Nah, 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 almost as if to question the legitimacy of our work and stuff like that. So I'm like, oh, I don't know if it's real or it is real. All of our work was real and it was chaotic and hectic. And I don't know if I would have called it duress in that moment, but I can absolutely understand. Like when I say if that did not get done, it was not getting done, like it was not gonna get done. It's not getting done.
Mhm.
Because my community would have been on the way out the door. Um, talk about the self-doubt that would have kicked in would have been outlandish. So all my other friends are done and they're done and they're done, and the people who I write with, they're gone. And it was a mess. So we hunkered down. And would I ever tell anyone else to do that? Absolutely not. Did we do it? We sure damn did.
Yes, I had
Hours
to
on hours on
hours
hours.
on hours,
Hours
and
and days. It was a haze. I mean, a haze is then should have never been done, and the haze is then like foggy, hard to remember
mhm,
at the same time. Both. Woo.
mhm,
Girl, that was
yeah,
chaotic. I mean, class A narcotic. Like we were on a different one. Gee, I
mhm,
can't believe we did that. That is absolutely
mhm.
wild.
And
Um,
I think about committees and chairs, like, and y'all were just okay with this? No, yeah, nobody
let
thought.
us do it. They were just like, do you want to or not? Like, are you doing this? Do it. I was like, okay, bet, run it. And then we made a system to get it done. I mean,
Mhm,
dragging, crying, screaming, dinners, whatever it took to get it done, we did it. And so for me, sometimes I think whenever I serve on committees, I'm typically the gentle, kind, get it done,
mhm,
but like get it done, but take care of yourself as you do it. So how long is it going to take you to do this in a way that doesn't mess you up, sort of thing? So if
mhm,
it's going to take you a year instead of 8 months, okay, then take the year, right? Because I'd rather you do it in a year than you do it in 6 months and be looking like how I did and going into a depression. Okay, cool. But no, people got to learn the hard way sometimes. But build the process that works for you. And the process for us was we have to get this done. How do we do this and like survive it? I mean, we were trying to be thoughtful, but really we were just trying to get it done. Like, how do we get this done and done in a way that does honor to the people who gave their time to our studies? How do we do this in a way that supports each other? Because we had a community, but me and you was literally like cheek to cheek the whole time.
Yeah, because we're the only two on the same timeline, right? Like,
so we were just like thugging because Jillian was in Ghana, like kicking it. We just knew she was writing. I mean, I think Brittany Anderson was writing, and there was a crew of Black women and Black people at Georgia who were writing, but not the way Lacy and I were. So we were same program, literally neighbors. I could look at her apartment from across the green, and in the same. It was just to connect it. So the work was just like, wow. I think if I had a student on a committee who was doing that, I would probably like, been there, done that. You need a care plan. You need a care plan. Like there's no way. And then you need an unwind plan. And you need so you've committed to work doggedly on a tight schedule. What does the extended aftercare plan look like? Because you don't go from it, you can do what you want to do. I would advise you not to go from one extreme to another extreme without a break. Like you bind up your work. Even as a practitioner now, we'll say we'll do a 6-week sprint. You run, you can sprint for so long, but then you gotta
rest.
We are purposeful. This is a sprint. You give it your all, you go. And when we break, we break. And I don't mean like I'm broken. I mean like I'm purposefully catching my breath, slowing myself down, all that kind of stuff. If you're gonna do the sprint, what does your break look like? What's that recovery look like? Both active and like sit still, laid out on the ground, catch my breath. What does all of that look like? So yeah, girl, that was wild and crazy adventures. I don't know why we was out here carrying on like that. And shout out to the chairs that let us just do it.
Well, I'm like, Christina, you started it with the email of saying this is what had to get done. And I tell people on this side of the things, I very well, if I knew I could, because this is important, because I didn't know that I could do this. But if I knew I could say, no, girl, I'm not doing that. That's ridiculous. Do you realize what you're asking me to do? I'm taking the whole year, right? But I say that if I knew, because yeah, it's easy to say now, like, of course you could have told her no. But in that moment, I felt like, no, she sent the email, so I gotta follow instructions. And like, Joan, this is the timeline. So we gotta do all of this.
My chair was like, do you want to graduate? And I was like, yeah. And she was like, well, when you want to graduate? Because girl, look, I'm on your schedule. Like when you trying to graduate? And I was like, well, my friends graduate and I need to go too. And then I think about again, what that would have looked like. That would have been, for context, Lacey and I were socialized that you come in with your master's, you get out in 3 years, right? So that's the norm. In our former program now, they tell you 3 is outlandish, just push 4, like just be cool, chill out. And so I think I had turned my funding back over. So I had said I no longer need extra funding. I would have had to go find new funding, right? At that point. I would have had to find a new place to live because my housing was connected to my funding. Would have, already ordered regalia already, because these timelines are outlandish. You're ordering stuff in anticipation for, etc. And so then it would have been like this letdown of people back home. And in spite my I do what I want to attitude, I really don't like disappointing people.
Right.
People I love, or just then what that would mean for my own sense of actually can I do it? And it behooves me not to let myself question my own ability, because I can very easily go into well, maybe this really isn't for you, or maybe this wasn't what you thought it was, or maybe you need to maybe. And then I was just like, look, I just got to get out of here. Because if I sit here thinking about my mentor and I sit here, trying to push through and trying to deal with cool stuff, and now I'm doubting myself, still very deep in grief, still on this doc student, raggedy, poor person salary. I just can't, whatever it costs you, get it done. Just get the fuck out of here. Athens is not where I love Athens when I'm on vacation. I got to get out of here. Get out of here.
I was
So
just thinking about Callie and Tito's the other day.
shout out to them fish tacos. Shout out to them fish tacos. Every time I want to have like a Black Women's Weekend in Athens, I'm like, we could do Callie and Tito's and these other
Yes.
places that I loved, and then get the hell out of Athens again. But oh
That part.
man,
I was talking to someone whose committee you're on, a publishable committee, and they were like, well, I know that you and Dr. Collier did it in this time, and I'm just trying to follow in footsteps.
don't
But
do that.
I said, oh, no, no. And I'm like, your committee, you couldn't have asked for a more supportive care community. And I said, and especially Dr. Collier, like, she is not going to be the one that's like, why didn't you do this? No.
Not at all.
I'm like, because
Not
we
at
know the
all.
cost. That's a cost to do that. So to your point, I do tell people you need a break. And I really tell people you have to take off of work. If you're gonna, I just had a student who was like 2 weeks, I need to do chapters 4 and 5. I'm like, you cannot work and do that. But
No.
the pressure, she worked
No.
and I'm like, you don't know the cost. And people, and I'm like, I get that y'all look at me and you're like, well, that's easy for you to say because you're on the other side. I'm like, it's because I'm on the other side that I'm telling you,
from
don't
these
do that.
wounds what
Yes.
not to do. Like I'm
Mhm.
telling you from that scar, don't do that. Or go ahead and you're gonna have the same fucking scar. That's what I'm telling you. You can
Mhm.
put the trigger warning on this because I'm not trigger a content because I'm a
Mm, no, I mean, this
everybody
is the
on here is
podcast.
grown.
Yes.
Everybody on here is grown. So I just, we do what we need to do often in grad school to get to our end goal. Y'all, there are always costs. There are always costs. And I know plenty of folks who were working full time and going to school and they took time off work, built it into their schedule. They either negotiated it with their supervisors or they worked a different schedule or they stopped working. They at least took a week to 2 weeks off for just concentrated, dedicated writing. And these were people who at the time were deans of students, or you could put in your role. They took time away. And honestly, if you have a supervisor who has done their doctorate, this is not a surprise for them that you need to take time away. The same way they weren't surprised when you took that time for qualifying exams or quals or whatever your, program calls it. They're not surprised by that because they know that's not sustainable. And even if you are working, somebody ain't getting their full got.
Right.
So either you writing full time and you BSing in the office, or you are in the office and BSing your work. Priorities and decisions. I'm not saying they're decisions you want to make because having money is real. And part of the planning around your doctorate is time. I quit my job. That was a choice. I chose to live on $24,000, $22,000 a year and some loans because I like to, pie in the sky, play around with ideas. And it's hard to do that tethered to the realities of budget and, performance outcomes. So at least for me. And so if you are working in any capacity, I think even when we were doing our assistantships, we took off.
I was like, office, absolutely not. No,
absolutely not. Shout out to Carla. I'm not doing that. So I just Carla was my boss. Absolutely not. Like I'm not. I will make up the time later. I'm not. I'm not because I've chosen to invest this time into my scholarship, and I need to divest from something else so that I can do this well and get to what I need to get to with a quality product that I'm okay with, that I'm good with. Right? Everybody ain't gonna have no, dissertation of the year award. That's fine, because technically only one, maybe two people get it. So if that's your aim, shout out to you. If that's your aim and you don't get it, still shout out to you.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, like, does your work do justice to the people and the phenomena and the things that you study? Quant people, shout out to y'all. I'm not talking to y'all, but still, I want you to be proud of your work. Qual people, make sure that your work, particularly if it's supposed to be transformative, that it does justice. So the offerings that people share with you through your study. So, take that time if you're able. Figure out what taking time looks like. What would enable you to take the time that you need to invest in your scholarship? That's the question. What do you need? What would enable you to invest that time?
Oh, you just gave me an idea. I feel like 4 doctors need to be on a podcast to talk about qualitative, because that's a whole different conversation. Because the people, I'm about to go on LinkedIn and just start yelling because I'm like, oh, the way y'all are teaching qual, I can't. My leaders, I can't. I'm gonna make
For all
I'm not gonna make it.
UGA's raggediness, I'm not gonna hold for all of the stuff that UGA got wrong. The Qual program, and I just can't. Darius Means and Chris Linder, like my God, just I took for granted. I regret. I have some regrets in life. One of them is that I did not finish my Qual certification while I was at Georgia. My goodness, to have a whole department dedicated to qualitative research and good qualitative research. People aren't confused. Just because you ask one open-ended question, baby, does not make that qualitative research. And I'm not trying to gatekeep. I'm trying to be accurate. I'm not trying to gatekeep, I promise. But I do think something should be gatekept. Just
Yeah.
not. Yeah, just gotta do better. And not because it's shameful to the people doing it, is that it causes confusion. And it doesn't help them do the work that they want to do. So faculty still tell them, well, just do phenomenology. That's not what they're trying to do. That doesn't actually best serve the question that they're getting at, the thing that they're trying to understand. That ain't it. But I just
And 50 interviews for one student in a dissertation. Stop
because
it.
your chair said you need enough you need folks to believe it. Baby girl, shut up. Like what? 50? Okay. All right. Person that's giving them this bad advice. Okay. And I tell students often, your chair is your chair. You are not going anywhere if your chair is saying you're not going anywhere. So what do you need to do to meet some satisfaction that your chair has, right? And gets your work to a place where you can do where your work can do what you need it to do. I'm not going to argue with your chair. I'm not your chair.
Right.
And if you come to my I'm still not going to be your chair because I'm a full-time staff member. Amen. You need to pick somebody in the grad school education and put me on your committee. I cannot be your chair.
That's a perfect segue because you have everyone's dream job. And I'm being a little facetious, but seriously, people like, you know what I want to do? I'm gonna be someone's like CDO or chief diversity officer. We don't use that language, but that's what the people use it, right? Like, and I'm like, could we start there? You know what? Never mind. Right. But like, I want to do this work and because I want to be in the place where I can influence policy and practices. And I'm like, do you know what you signed up for? And so I would love it. And I know this is a very broad question, and I'm sure there's a million ways you could go.
Yeah.
What? And I'm not saying it's bad. I'm just
What do
saying
I
people don't
actually do?
understand what do you actually do?
What
What
do
is
I
the
actually do?
reality of the job?
Yeah. Well, let me start out saying I have a bomb ass boss named Inobong and a branch. And when I say brilliant, I mean brilliant. Full professor of sociology and is a full-time administrator. She's our senior vice president for equity. Her brain runs in structures, right? So what we're both church. Only what you do for Christ will last, right? But within institution, structures are your best bet, right? Structures being policy, being mechanisms, et cetera, have the best chance of surviving, and even structures get torn apart. And so let me run folks through how I got here so they understand how I'm coming from. So I arrived at this work. I was always, I think, inclusion focused as a practitioner in student affairs, took on my first role in our diversity area formally in New Brunswick in 2020 of January 2020. And then 2020 happened and everything went chaotic and interest convergence kicked the fuck in. And baby, diversity is our institutional value. All right, come on, institutions that are built on exclusion. Okay, I guess. So now we have broader institutional, things around inclusion. And my boss got moved into she chose to take on the university's senior equity role, right? Equity, not diversity, senior equity role. And so I went with her and straddled New Brunswick and Rutgers totally. I went from director of diversity education and outreach to director for institutional equity and strategic initiatives, then senior director for the same thing, to now assistant vice president. This is month 9 in my role, something like that. No, June, so month 11 in my role. All right, I'll be a year next month in my role. What I do in my role, if I think about my priorities, is that I am responsible for institutional implementation. I'm leading institutional implementation for our university-wide diversity strategic plan. I'm responsible for university-wide capacity building mechanisms for diversity education and capacity building. And I'm responsible for Lord, there's another part in there for these like strategic initiatives that move some things forward across the institution. And so on a day-to-day basis, that means like me supervising our senior director for our Tyler Clemente Center, which in New Brunswick is over capacity building around diversity education and translating research into practice. Is the R2P program, research to practice program, that says my research is, if I take my dissertation work around Black women and sense of belonging, if I was in that program, I would say, what do faculty need to know around Black women's experiences, and how do I build a toolkit for that, and or host a workshop or a series of workshops to inform faculty of how you build a program for the margin, so if it hits folks in the center, and or design some mechanism for Black women doctoral students for an institution so that they can come together and provide some peer mentorship as a support mechanism, translated into practice. And so does all that stuff there. I supervise someone else who does the facilitation of workshops and restorative practices around campus, right? Cool. And someone else who does the strategic initiatives piece, be it the grants that we provide to university members to do their work. Now, my job is to supervise all them, make all that stuff work, and think about how our strategic plan across the institution comes to life. And because I don't supervise folks on the other 3 chancellor-led unit areas, and I only supervise one person in New Brunswick, how do all these plans work together at the institutional level? And the central administrative unit, which is like 12 or 14 purely administrative units that are kind of like the feds that oversee stuff, but they got a business. How am I working with all of them to ensure that what they're providing through their, as their institutional functional role, right? The role they play for the institution, it advances diversity and equity as institutional values, right? How does that happen? While also serving as internal consultants to the institution. Now, part of the work for me and where I'm coming from is how do we ensure that the leaders have what they need? So I do an inclusive leadership academy. I've coordinated some of our areas across the institution to do an inclusive leadership network. So how are my peers thinking about inclusive leadership? I leave leadership development to HR because that's their functional role. But for me, it's how are you thinking about trauma-informed work? How are you thinking about restorative practices? How are you thinking about difference? How are you thinking about power consciousness? How are you thinking about grief, right? If our policy on bereavement only extends to family, right? Mom, dad, sister, brother, grandparent. How are you thinking about when grief shows up in the workplace? How can you support people through that? Are you clear as a supervisor how power plays a role in your relationship, and not just you telling folks what to do, but when someone makes a statement about blah, 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 right? Even though it's protected by the First Amendment, do you understand impact? Can you have that conversation with someone? Not to discipline, but to say, hey, that doesn't rise to a formal grievance, and it tears up, it causes harm in a way that is not legible by our policies. While we're saying, hey, is there a way to be thoughtful about policy so that it catches some stuff? And if it's not, right, because the law doesn't really do care, the law does law, but the law is not a barometer or measurement for care or justice all the time. So how do we tend to the stuff that's in the gray area? And that's where all the fun creativity kicks in, and where I'm often frustrated by the lack of imagination. And so what I will tell people is, if you have not done your work around the trauma you've experienced, you get a therapist before you step into this work. As a senior diversity person or a person who's in an institutional equity role, my job is not to work out of my wounds. And I'm not trying to be funny, but I see a lot of folks calling themselves diversity educators and transformers, and they're bleeding out loud. And they're not getting to the work. And I'm like, be more clear about what your work is. And if you're talking about doing this work in an institutional context, I don't trust institutions, and I am institution. You're going to have to grapple every fucking day. I do. If you're someone with no internal dialogue, baby, this is not for you. If you are someone who loves a show, or, maybe it is for you. My sort of guiding thing is, how do I make this place better? How do I get us closer to justice? How I get us, and justice, can places on stolen land do justice? I mean, these are the sort of thoughts I have in my head.
No,
Like,
this is important because
this is what's in my head.
I was just talking to someone who was like, "Oh yeah, I have this consulting business. I want to do EDI consulting." And then they proceeded to, go on this rant about like, well, first we need to get these people to realize that the letters are wrong. And I'm like, you're missing the forest for the
Yeah,
tree
you're missing
because what are you talking
about
about?
the wrong thing. Like,
Yes.
or I could do a whole talk. I mean, and sometimes I feel like, who am I to be talking? But it's just like, pick the hill you're gonna die on. So a couple things about me is I'm pragmatic as shit. Smart as fuck and pragmatic. And so I am pushed by Black feminism. I would love, I try to call myself a little like burgeoning, like abolitionist. How does this work? I have there's just all these things. It's a lot of grappling, I find, in the work, right? Because the First Amendment is a real thing. And people can say what the fuck they want a lot of times. And then the institutions like, we value diversity and inclusion. And I'm not speaking in my assistant vice president role. I'm talking about Joan, right? We can make a lot of statements, but them shits bump heads sometimes. They bump heads.
Yeah, I was
And
gonna ask you
so,
about that. Like, how do you
yeah,
deal
I
with that?
mean, it is an interesting grapple because you can have you can oh gosh, what do I want to say? Slow your brain, slow your brain, slow your brain, calm down, calm down. There we go. There
Y'all
you
see that thought work right there? Okay.
go. Slow your brain. So multiple things are true at the same time. I live in like a multiplicity of truths. So it is true that we have the First Amendment, and it is true that commitments to diversity, equity, and inclusion sometimes bump heads with those. And it is true that sometimes they do not bump heads with the First Amendment, right? And it is true that depending on who's saying it, because of structures of inequity, they don't always have full access to those rights. So there's just a convergence of fuckery that's happening. And so my brain is thinking through, how do we, because you got to uphold the First Amendment. It's just what it is. And how do we say, if the First Amendment is what it is, how do people counter protest? And how do people leverage the First Amendment to get what they want to say said? Right, cool. And how does the institution hold, right? In my role as an administrator at any institution I would be at, it is how do you hold the tension and the nuance of those things? Because they're not going away, y'all, unless you're in a place like Florida, where the state is literally saying you just cannot. Which, if you're following any of the First Amendment's rights groups, be it fire, be it Penn, they're telling you that's a violation of the First Amendment, that you cannot do that. So you see this back and forth, this struggle. So for people who just want simplicity, this ain't for you. It's not for you, because it is not a simple job in its actuality. Theory and practice are not the same thing. In theory, we're decolonizing stuff. What you decolonizing when higher ed is a colonial project? I'm not trying to be funny.
No, it's real.
Sometimes I can tell people haven't read. They haven't done their work. And even me, sometimes I'm like, girl, now why the fuck did you say that shit? That sounds unread as hell. Like, girl, get it together. You have to always be, I find that I do my best work when I'm clear on where the gaps are. And it doesn't mean, I often get people who say something to me like, well, why can't you just? And I say, as soon as you put just, you're letting me know you don't understand how this really works. Because doing inclusion work in institutions that were founded on exclusion is like going in and gutting a house to put in air conditioning because it was built without air. Like, y'all know what it looks like to renovate a house. It's messy, it's dusty, it does not go the way you want to go. It always costs more than what you thought it was. So
more
when I say it
time,
costs
more
more, it takes more
energy.
time. And so you're dealing with the why is it taking so long? Y'all been doing surveys for 15 years, and these schools and the institution of higher education has been around for over 200 years. It's going to take time, even as I'm tired of time. How long do you want us to wait? How long do you want us to wait, right? So I am institution, and I'm tired of institution. So it is a do the good work that is within my scope. What is in my scope to do? I'm not ignorant to the ways that the rest of that some parts of institutions cut up and don't want to move in that direction. If you're doing this work, you should expect resistance. When people are like, I can't believe people are pushing back. What? Are you on crack? Like, in what world did you expect everyone to get on board with this? Everyone does not agree. They never have. Everyone has not agreed. Everyone didn't agree during the Civil Rights Movement. Everyone didn't agree during the Black Power Movement. There was no point in history where everyone agreed. No point. I don't care what the mythology said. I find that my work requires me to slow down, take my good breaths, really think about what matters, think about what is the impact on the people. My brain is always who's getting harmed. Honestly, who's getting harmed? How do we reduce harm while we are trying to get stuff right? And how are we trying to get people whole while we're trying to get systems right? And systems take time. And particularly when the people who have the power are not necessarily interested in, or they're just lackadaisical about it, you know? So people say inclusion, and they're really saying, look, we have a compositionally diverse space. And I'm like, well, that's great that you have some compositional diversity. And now I'm going to ask you how people across identities and experiences are actually being impacted by the campus. I never thought about that. Okay, I'm glad the picture looked cute. What's the actual experience? All right, that's right. All right, now let's talk about what some outcomes over here look like. How are people doing? What's retention look like? What's promotion look like? What's access to resources look like? Who's voluntarily showing up for stuff? I mean, those are all the sorts of things. And then just stuff like you want a sense of community, because belonging's been coming up a lot now. At the root of it all is belonging. People need to belong, and I'm like,
let me ask a question, because I went on a
I
whole
have no public comment on belonging. I have no public
Okay,
comment
I have a
on
so a
belonging.
student had a comp question that said, talk about DC. How did they say, like, not D,
DEIB.
DIB? And I was like, what is that? Like, I know what the letters mean, and I was like, that's not. It's just like I can't find literature. I was like, and off, like, without me thinking, I was like, because it's not a real thing. And I was like, come back, do not tell her that, because it's her question, and you can't say.
Let
But
me
I
put on my
mean,
good educator hat. So when I slow myself down, so things about Joan is Joan has a very visceral reaction, and then I have a let me pause and try to come up with what is useful. What is useful to actually say? What is informative or helpful, right? Because my visceral reaction is belonging. If y'all don't get the hell out of here, not because I don't believe in it,
right,
but because I find that folks are substituting equity and inclusion for belonging,
yep,
undercutting it.
yeah.
And if that is what you're doing, I'm not here for that shit. I'm not trying to hear that dumbass shit. I'm not with the shits. If we are saying we are intentional about belonging, because we understand that a lot of equity and inclusion work and work around diversity gets dinged, aside from the structural pieces, because folks like, well, I don't have belonging where I am. Then we have to understand that belonging actually, again, on the list of needs, or just basic humanity, people want to belong. People want to belong. But when that work usurps structural issues, we got a problem. So if folks are saying we do belonging work, then I'm like, that's basic community building work. Anyone can be responsible for that. So for me, that's the HR function. For me, that is how do you support supervisors and managers in creating belonging for their people? What are they talking about around community? How are we even talking about universities as literal communities and not these haphazard, we slapped you together so y'all are in proximity, but there's no principles, right? You don't even have principles of community, but you're around talking about we in the community. What are your shared principles and values? I don't know. Then what kind of community do you have? What do y'all actually value? Or are y'all just in proximity? So when I hear people talking about belonging with diversity, equity, and inclusion, my visceral response is, if I'm honest, which, is like, this is somebody trying to undercut it. Like that's my first reaction. This is somebody who actually doesn't want to deal with structural shit. They're trying to be cute. I don't want to hear that shit. When I pause and actually listen, what I'm hearing is we can barely get to equity and inclusion because we don't even have a base of belonging. And if that's what you're saying, I'm saying it's not your diversity office's job to do that. You need to get with your structures that require it. And that means that supervisors and managers need to be doing it, and not just student affairs people. And that would also mean you have to stop diminishing the work that student affairs people do, and stop calling it frilly work, and actually tend to how you show up with people. And belonging will actually challenge the way a lot of our policies work, because we don't care about community, and our policy doesn't tend to community. it tends to compliance. So there's
Oh, that's at that point, really quickly, because I
yeah,
don't think people realize you said like that's not the equity officer's job. That's structure. If you
that's
have
little
belonging community,
structure.
belonging people, you gotta go somewhere else. And I feel like people conflate the two often,
They
and that's why
do.
their feelings get hurt.
They get feelings hurt on, I mean, again, and I'll probably listen back to this and be like, oh, I should have clarified that, should have clarified that. What I'll say is there's nothing wrong with wanting belonging. As humans, we
Hmm.
want to belong. I mean,
Yep.
literally, we literally need it. There's a lot of stuff that I can say about Maslow, but belonging sits on the fucking chart. It's right there. It is right underneath self-actualization.
Hmm.
Can you get to actualization without it? Sure, it's gonna be much harder. And you're probably gonna be really wounded with a lot of fucking trauma, and then you don't know how to fucking talk to people or be in community with people. So when I say belonging matters, but it doesn't belong to diversity, equity, and inclusion at its core, is because it's up to right. If institutions say they are communities, what do you mean by community? What
Hmm.
should I expect from my community? And before diversity, equity, and inclusion ever came along as institutional structures, because once you get people in those roles, those become structures, right? Who was doing that community work? Part of when I say people get upset with EDI work or whatever folks are calling it, part of it is because they don't feel like they belong on their campus. And so then they see purposeful efforts to create belonging and through diversity, belonging through inclusion, right? Inclusion is how I feel like I belong. And they're like, well, I don't get that. Some part of me doesn't get that. Be it white, be it the straight, be it the able-bodied, be it the neurotypical, even though what they're not recognizing, and part of this is, in theory, the community or proximity that already exists centers those things. So if anybody's feeling it, you in that capacity feel it. As a person who is neurotypical, the way classes are taught, boring, still makes sense to me. And
Yeah.
whatever, I can figure it out, right?
Hmm.
Sidewalks work for me, right? The way the time of day does it, I get it. It gets on my nerves, but I can make it work. So that's what some of that is. But I would argue that is everyone's job, and in particular, HR. That's their job, right? Because you are the people centered
Hmm.
portion of the campus. So stop looking. I can't say stop looking. It would behoove institutions to understand that people work is everybody's fucking work, man. It is everybody's work. So by the time you get to, if people have a place to belong, let me be clear, you don't, where you find belonging is on you. Who loves you? Who's showing you love? Institutions would be better if everyone had a daggone relationship coach. Go where you got love. If that's in your student group, if that's in this group you done came up with, go do it. Disconnected from my job, I get with the rest of the Divine Nine people and faculty and staff in New Brunswick. And I say, hey, let's get together. Let's go to lunch. Let's do dinner. The art museum, I sit on the advisory board. They have a Black History Month program. If you're able, come out.
Hmm.
That's my way of building belonging. But to be fair, if you know Joan and Marvette, you know we do community building where we are.
Hmm.
Part of what got people fucked up about CASA is that we did our own community building and folks assumed it was a program. Our program didn't get in the way, but
Right.
we built that. We did that ourselves. And I think some of what's missing is folks not knowing how to actually build community. I will go back to people don't know how to deal with conflict. And so folks want to, somebody on Twitter said, everybody wants to be in community and nobody wants to learn conflict management. Nobody wants to learn how to care for each other. Being in community means that you are going to be in close proximity, and there requires some vulnerability and some sharing. You have to know how to address conflict. This shit's going to come up. In the institutional context, what is conflict? What is harm?
Hmm.
How do you tend to it? That's all that work. What I bring to my job as an equity or as an inclusion person, that's the question that you asked me, and I done went on 15 tangents, is my job to think about how does the institution get to its commitments around equity and inclusion as we are shaping some of those commitments. Because again, in theory, we are some of the content experts, not all of them, but some of them. And we don't just have, these ideas. We do have ideas that are grounded in literature, other practices, other, frameworks of, ways of knowing. And then so how do we actually do this? Not in the way that in a perfect world. Well, it's not a perfect world. I don't know what budget's going to look like next year. I don't know. I don't know that we always going to have all the staff to get it done. So I say to my staff, we're not going to kill ourselves. I lost my mentor when she was 45. She lost hers in her 40s. I don't have no plans on y'all scattering my ashes no time soon. So how do I do the work that meets the needs of the people? Because again, who's being harmed? How do we make the organization be better aligned with who we said we want to be? How do we show up and enact the values that we espouse? That's what my work goes back to. And when I'm in a meeting and passive aggressive whiteness shows up, do I have the grounding to stick with it, process later, and then address it if I need to in real time? Because I can't address every time somebody shows up passive aggressive. What I look like, I would be exhausted.
That's all you would be doing. Yeah.
I got work to do. If you just want to fight, you're going to be tired real quick. Some people get into work just to fight. And I mean like fight with people. I don't have time all the time.
To prove that. And listen, we don't even have time. I'm like, you need to come
No,
back because like
get that shit together, man.
I want to have a conversation too, like later. You need to come back on the podcast because a conversation about people are like, well, the only reason why I got these letters is because they have to listen to me. And so I got time.
Don't. No, they don't. No, they don't. Let me be clear. As someone who sat through faculty meetings as a faculty member, no, the fuck they don't. And they won't. If you thought getting some letters behind your name was going to fix it, baby, you made a poor decision. Find you a grieving ritual. As a death doula, as a grief doula, let me help you grieve that process. It's not. Because STEM people gonna tell you that you're a soft science, humanities, education person. That's not a real degree. The tenure folks are gonna tell your assistant self, you not that's cute. It's always gonna be a publication count. If it's not a publication count, it's where did you publish count. If it's so trying to the weapons tools will not dismantle the master's house. They may for a time give you access to do some things, but they will not dismantle it. So are they a good resource? Yes. Do they give me access to spaces? Yes. Do they help other people see me as legitimate? Absolutely yes. Does it mean they're going to listen? Absolutely the fuck not. I was just in the meeting. I made a wonderful offering. And this man, without even talking to me, talked to another man and asked if there was a definition for what I just asked about. He literally never spoke to me. Never, not once. Talked over me to another man and asked him if there was a definition for what I just said. I shit you not. And I said, oh, okay, I see where we at. Again,
okay, that's what we're doing today. Got it. Thank you.
Myself in real time because I was like, boy, ain't this some shit, boy. And none of y'all got my fucking degrees. Neither one of you have my degrees. Are y'all on crack? I was screaming. I screamed to myself and I said, baby, power gonna power every day. And so it's just like, if that's what you did it for, I'm grateful that you had a source of motivation. But anger can only fuel you for so long without burning you the fuck out, and eventually will burn you out. I hope you find a new source of energy soon. Bell Hooks will tell you it's a love ethic. You can pick whatever you want to fuel you. Sometimes we are fueled by anger. Toni Morrison said, be angry and then go to work. Baby, you can't stay in there all the time. If I take it back to a raggedy theory, right, of old school negrescence, right, you can only stay in that, one stage for so long where you're mad all the time. You can only stay there for so long. Why? I'm glad you asked. It's not fucking sustainable. So I'm glad it got you to your degree. These people don't give a fuck about your degrees. Somebody cares, right? The power structure cares that you have it to legitimize you. And then you add on these other pieces and that shit ain't gonna legitimize you for long, right? Only in certain circles and certain places of time, but disrespect is gonna disrespect either way. And so find you something that fuels you. So could I be angry all the time? Yeah. Am I angry? Some days, absolutely yes. But I go back to how do I support people and how do I move the institution to where it said it wants to be? And if it doesn't make statements, right? Because then my question would be, well, what the school don't say it want to be nothing. Then your job is to be subversive. What do people need? What does inclusion look like? And how do you get toward building it? How do you do it? Within the context that you're in, as you try to shift the context, both and trying to shift local, micro and impact macro. That's what I do. On top of all the other shit.
On top of all the other shit.
Building something else here and there, sure. Trying to reframe. I'm doing a lot of reframing for people. My job is to educate. I'm always in educator mode, right? Educator mode, but I'm an administrator. My job is to administrate, to move the organization, right? Practice. I don't do so much policy, but I inform policy. I'm thinking about how do I get the structures that enable the things, right? So I made up an academy. Leaders, y'all need to come over here. Define, use your words wisely. What do your words do for the work? What do your words do for the work? How do you move the work? Have your fields, build you a survival strategy while you in it. Our team, we take vacation. My boss invests in our development. She tells us, take care of yourself. That's what you need to do. And she means it. We work hard. Excellence is a must. And we must care for ourselves, both.
Yeah.
There was a stretch where I didn't take a vacation. I didn't take a day off for 2 months. And she said, by the end of next week, I expect dates in my inbox that you will not be here. That's not sustainable. I usually post on Instagram when I like travel somewhere new. She said, I ain't seen a new post in 2 weeks. It's summertime. Why you not out? What's going on? I was like, first of all, stalker. She was like, not stalking, clocking. You are not having adventure. What's up with you? Damn, got to take care of yourself. So I know I'm not on topic at all, but
No, I already have in my brain. I will be sending you an email for the Happy
yeah,
Free and Paid podcast because we didn't even get into being a grief doula and how you managing that. And so we're gonna do that on that podcast. But this has been amazing. I want to say thank you so
yeah,
much
yeah,
sharing your time, your brilliance, your experience.
yeah.
I'm sure people are gonna be like, so can she come back? Like, can she be in the group actually and talk to us? Because people still talk about you inside the group. They're
Oh,
like,
because
is she coming
I'm
back?
ridiculous. That's
Is
why
she
I'm
coming?
ridiculous. I just be
I
living
mean,
my best life.
your dissertation is probably the number one dissertation people ask me about. And I think you need to hear that and be in community about that because I think there would be some healing for doc student you. But you will be getting
Heard.
several emails
You
from
can heard,
me.
Dr. Lacy. You heard.
Yes. Thank
I'm
you.
rolling my eyes on camera. That's what y'all
Yes.
can see.
And I will put our information in the show notes, y'all.
Yes,
The
yes.
people on YouTube saw you, so but yeah, if y'all want to see all the eyes and the reactions, come over to YouTube and watch it. Thank you.
You're welcome,
And
boo.